Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. So this time we're going to be speaking with Gabriel Roberts about the roots of spiritual beliefs. But Just Energy Radio is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. It's also brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, and psychic readings. So give me a call, drop me a note, and we can set up a time for a private conversation. So let me tell you a little bit about this hour's guest. Gabriel D. Roberts is a theological scholar, researcher, public speaker that specializes in discussions about the nature of perception and belief. After 27 years of passionate search and study, Gabriel stepped away from his long-held Christian faith to explore into a more expansive and fluid worldview. His latest book, The Quest for Gnosis, explores the root of beliefs, the power of ecstatic state in one life. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, the author of Quest for Gnosis, Gabriel Roberts. Hey, Gabriel, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. You were referred to me by one of the listeners, and I'm just, when I went to your page and saw your thing, I was like, oh, he would be fun to have on the show. So cool.
Thank you, whoever that was.
Yeah, I don't remember. Oops. One of the things that I really like, and one of my new projects, is looking at where we came up with our beliefs. So I'm looking forward to this discussion with you. But let's start with, maybe you can share a little bit about yourself, because you said that you had a long-held Christian belief. But what took you from being, I'm going to assume a fundamentalist Christian to what you're doing now?
Well, I wrote a book called Born Again to Rebirth, which spells out that story. But as a synopsis, I grew up in a Pentecostal evangelical Christian background in Tacoma, Washington. And from there, I grew up and was very passionate in my beliefs and all of that. When I was a child, I used to preach sermons in front of the fireplace for my family and friends, things like that. They got a kick out of that. I went to Salt Lake City, Utah with my parents and their friends, and I'd hand out tracts to Mormon children and tell them why Mormonism wasn't real Christianity. But there was a serious problem in that the thing promised was not the thing received. It's kind of like when you go to Burger King or McDonald's and there's this picture of this beautiful, delicious meal. And then when it comes to you, it looks like, somebody sat on it. And the meal is not the same as the menu, so to speak. And when it was kind of that way with my faith, it seemed like there was something there, but there was something very off. And when it came to kind of my differentiation as I got older between faith and facts, and or things that were readily apparent, like not being awful to people, not being a bigot, not being interested in war, things like that. Where I was and where the Bible stood and where my Pentecostal beliefs stood were two different places, and it was kind of a ever-expanding precipice between myself and all of those things. And it eventually ended up in kind of a collapse and a crisis of identity in which I didn't know who I was. If you're familiar with the Bible, the Apostle Paul talks about how we are slaves to Christ, and it is not we who live, but Christ that lives in us. We are actually supposed to, as Christians, entirely remove ourself from ourself and essentially become Christ-like automatons of sorts, in which we are slaves. There are popular songs. There was a popular song by a Christian rock band called Some Kind of Zombie. And, the lyrics are like, I hear you speak and I obey, some kind of zombie. And this is a notion that is very powerful because in one sense, it accomplishes much more in that sort of disillusion of self concept that in the East is so prevalent, but it does it from a dominator perspective. There's someone who you belong to. You were imperfect and you were only made right because this person you belong to made you right. Otherwise, you are worthless. And after a while, I started to realize that didn't jive with my heart. And primarily, the biggest problem that I had was when my son was born, I looked down at him and I thought to myself, I would never set him on fire because he upset me or because I thought I was too good for him. And I am just a regular guy. I occasionally do bad stuff or less than perfect stuff. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I'm a fool at times. And how is it that I, being this imperfect person, am capable of a level of compassion and of all things that are good? It seemed, absolutely illogical that a truly loving God would put in this weird contest of sin and salvation in such a way that he would set percentage-wise, very broad percentages, 9 out of 10 of his children, to hell. Like if you imagine everyone who's ever lived, statistically speaking, it's far less than 10% of them would be Christian by any loose sense of the term. And if that were the case, if you had to be a Christian to go to heaven and everyone else went to hell, then you have essentially a contest that you can't win. A contest where 9 out of 10 people go to hell. And I was explaining this to somebody the other day. It's like going to the bank and trying to sell them on your business model in which you have 90% losses, right? Well, no, this is the best we can do. And the bankers would be like, no, we're not going to give you a loan because this is not a successful plan. So again, it just doesn't really make logical sense from that perspective. And I fought that for a really long time. And it created a genuine crisis in my life.
Well, I mean, when you think about religion and what you just said, the only way that they've really gotten it to spread and amount to anything is through force. Right. Which is kind of scary. And then it's still not even that many
there's a really nice... Exactly. And there's this really great caveat is because of the nature of this unseen force that can watch over you, it makes you self-policing. You don't have to have someone look over you. You automatically know that you're being watched. Oh, I'm
like, that's really working?
Yeah, Christopher Hitchens referred to it as the idea of a celestial North Korea, in which even when you're dead, you cannot escape this totalitarian regime that is constantly surveilling everything that you do and monitoring you and watching you, and will firmly and swiftly come upon you with the full retribution and power that it wields. And that it's not seen that way because, when you're a Christian, you just talk about the love and the grace and the forgiveness. But you have to, it's kind of like being in an abusive relationship. You're like, oh, well, they're really sweet when they don't beat me, or I'm the one kid out of the 10 that doesn't get beaten senseless, so I guess it's okay. They really love me, so they must be a loving parent. It just doesn't make sense at all.
I mean, I gave up on the whole religion thing when I was in second grade in Catholic school, so it doesn't make any sense. And, one of the things that you mentioned that I just want to kind of go back to, they have this belief that they're supposed to listen to what Jesus said or, listen to this guidance that they get. But they don't listen to that guidance, or I don't think they listen to that inner guidance. They listen to what someone else told them out of some dogmatic place, and then they just follow those precepts, kind of like the Stafford people.
Right. And there's a fundamental flaw in that you're told from the get-go that you were imperfect from the start. You're not even starting at zero. You're starting at less than zero. You start with original sin, for instance. And for the rest, for the whole time that you participate in that religion, the very basis of all of it is that you are not worth it, but somebody made you worth it, and so you should be thankful for how good you have it. And this idea, I realized that I had carried that with me even after I left the belief system, that there was this part of me that felt like I had to have an outside source to come fix things. And so people will leave their religion and they'll go directly into politics and think that a politician's going to save them. Or they go into a work environment and they say, oh, well, this business life is going to do it. I should fully invest myself in this. And in a way, they're always relegating the authority and the power to change, the power to cause miracles, all of those things. They give it away because they were told from the get-go that they weren't worth anything, that they were imperfect, and that they were even bad. And so this is the foundation on which all of this is placed, and it's an insidious thing that takes a lot of people a lifetime to get over, and many people obviously will never get over it, and it translates into their personal relationships. It translates into everything that they do. It's a thought virus of sorts.
Well, and it seems like, there is so much that we operate on as a society. There's the religious piece, but, I feel like it's an even bigger issue where, you look at Christianity and its impact on society, but then there are things that came even before Christianity or, are kind of a common denominator between cultures, regardless of religion, that control who we are and what we do and the life that we live and how we view the world in the general sense. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, there are factors involved that go far beyond that. There are methods because of human nature that are tried and true. There are ways to manipulate people that are tried and true methods, and they work. And they're always based on a little bit of truth. It's not like it's absolute BS. It's more like there's a mingling of truth, at least just enough to keep people interested or to have them say, well, there's got to be something to this because this particular aspect works. And this is kind of what I explore in the Quest for Gnosis, not the extraneous things that are tacked on, but actually the core elements that are real things that aren't necessarily that are useful to the atheist, the Buddhist, the Hindu, the Christian, the magician, everybody, because it's a human thing, not a necessarily a Jehovah thing or a Vishnu thing. And that's what I explore in the Quest for Gnosis is human spirituality, the stuff that works and why it works and why it's important to know the difference between that and somebody else coming along and selling you a load.
Well, how do you think we got into this mess in the first place? How did we end up being so tunnel visioned? Is the only word that I can kind of stick with that.
Well, for one thing, we're trained to do so from childhood. As I was saying, with the notion, when you have the starting notion that you're imperfect, that you need an outside source to fix you, it creates an infantile situation in which you're always underneath someone else. It's a pecking order of sorts. And so there's that. Getting into the idea of a religious hierarchy or why even religion plays a role, I think has a lot to do with things that are on the shadows, in the shadows of our history, that are so far back it's difficult to know for sure. I would say that since there is a long-standing theme in the deepest of our cultures and in the deepest of our traditions, there's a lot of references to psychedelics and things like that. I think that does have a part to play in the development of religion. In the Vedas, you have reference to soma, this brew or this kind of substance that they would take that would allow them to have contact with the divine. There's information that Christianity had this influence. So it's almost like, if I may say, in many ways, it's quite possible that religion is built upon someone else's psychedelic trip. You know, it's kind of like I call you up and I say, "Hey, Rita, I just had the craziest trip. I saw a dragon and this and that and the other, but I learned a valuable truth from it." And you're like, "Wow, that is a valuable truth. Well, I'm going to write this down." And then 100 years later, it's the gospel of Gabriel tripping balls. And so it just goes through that. And then in a way, it's somebody else's trip report. And I don't think that's the only factor, but I definitely, especially after my own psychedelic experiences, would definitely say that was a key element in it, because it's so pervasive around the globe and there's documentation of it. It's not like it's just a random thing that some hippies came up with. It's been around, and it's been in the ground everywhere. You know, people see a funny looking mushroom and they eat it, and all of a sudden they had a vision, and it's crazy. And I'm not saying that's the only way that happens either. We have dimethyltryptamine, which is known to have endogenous bursts in our own minds. So you can have a vision that's totally a psychedelic vision that has nothing to do with you consuming another substance. So it's quite possible that is really the foundation of it all, as far as religion is concerned, and how we come up with these ideas of something non-material affecting our present material world.
But couldn't there be non-material things affecting our current material world? And that the dogma is saying, well, you're just crazy. You must be on drugs.
Of course. And here's the problem, is that we make these delineations of black and white between, oh, well, I'm a mechanistic scientist, oh, well, I'm a New Ager, or I'm a Wiccan, or I'm a Hindu, or so on and so forth, or I'm a hippie, or whatever you want to say. And that's not the way that it works. Our minds are very complex. You know, I don't, because of my background especially, I don't say one thing or another with absolute surety, because I realize that it's quite possible that the foundation of our reality is built upon chaos. And because of that, going around and telling people what's what absolutely is a bad idea, because I know I was quite sure of something in the past, and now I realize it was wrong, and I can't undo that. I can't go back to everyone I ever talked to. You know, I must have converted at least 40 people in my lifetime. I can't go hunt them down. So now I have these people, and who knows what they did with that information, that I'm responsible in my own way for that. But as far as people saying you're cuckoo or whatever, the proof is in the pudding. Is there a foundational change? Is there a new way in which you see the world that is improving the way you treat other people? I think that's a good litmus test for whether something is total bollocks or whether it's good.
All right, Bill. So we have a question in the chat room, and his question is, does he think it's beneficial to accept others' religious beliefs than have extremist type views that one religion is the true religion?
That's a great question. I don't think that it's necessarily. I think that question should change slightly, in that we're not looking for the one religion that answers it all, right? Or, well, my religion is the right one, but I should tolerate the other ones. Instead, we're looking at it from the wrong framework. Imagine that we're all looking at the same thing. But if you and I, it's that old story of the elephant. One blind man is tugging on the tail of an elephant saying it's a snake, and the other one's like, well, no, it's no, this is a pillar, touching one of the legs of the elephant. It's like, oh, no, this is a pillar, and another touches the ear, and it's like, no, it's a giant blanket. We might be looking at the same thing, but we're looking at it through different lenses and different perspectives. If you sit in a room with 5 different people who are all looking at one person, the one person looking at the 5 can see where they all sit. And yet the 5 looking at the one person will see a slightly different version and perspective. There are thought experiments that you can do. For instance, if you had a classroom full of people, and I'm drawing this from Robert Anton Wilson, who wrote the book Prometheus Rising. He talked about how while he was teaching one day, he asked 20 students who were in his class to write down the things that they saw in the hallway as they walked into the classroom. And they all wrote down 10 to 15 different things. But no 2 of them wrote the same number of things. There were common elements, but they were all different. So what they did was they took the person who observed the most things, and then they showed how many things he still missed. We all walk through the same hallways, but what we notice is different. And I think the foundation of that is that we're trying to look for some sort of sense of peace and stability. We want to have safety. And you can find this even in the extremes of people like Richard Dawkins, who has a kind of absolute attitude, a certainty. And I believe that kind of certainty is foolish, because we just don't know. What we know is a tiny, tiny amount of all that there is to know and all that's possible. That's not to negate the things that we learn and understand, but rather if we see it more from a theosophical approach, in which we understand the advances of science and the research that's done, and accept it and see, oh, this is really good, this is really great. And we do like the Dalai Lama has suggested, and compare that to our religious views and say, do our religious views totally, are they off base compared to what we know to be true scientifically now? Then perhaps we should get rid of this particular doctrine that is obviously not true anymore, or that never was true, but we didn't have the proof for it. And I think if we take this approach, we have, instead of this sense of stability and defending our territory, rather, we see the universe for what it is, and that is an endlessly unfolding education for us, that everyone we talk to has something to teach us. They're not our enemy. Everyone can be our teacher instead. And it doesn't mean that we have to, as Terence McKenna said, be so open-minded that the wind whistles between our ears, but rather we're capable of considering a notion without accepting it. And we can play with these things, and we can learn a lot more doing it that way, rather than trying to find the ideal religion, so to speak, and then just tolerating the ones that aren't as good from that perspective.
When you talk about science, it seems like scientists don't even really know what's going on, and their thoughts and theories and basis of what we formulate our worldview, I want to say it keeps changing, but it doesn't change that fast, as fast as the material comes in. And I always find it interesting, and actually it's one of my pet peeves, that they will run around and say, the universe is 13.5 billion years old, and blah, 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 when they don't even really know. And they won't even say, well, we speculate or we theorize. They don't ever use those words. It's like, this is how it is. It really kind of pisses me off, because if you knew it was a theory, then you could take it as a theory and move on, because you might find a better theory that works for you versus one that they state as fact, but it's not a fact.
For sure. There is an issue of clinical erudition when it comes to that. However, if we look at science, right, as an institution and what it's given us over the last 100 years versus what religion on its own has given us in the last 100 years, I think it's safe to say that we're pretty glad that penicillin is around. We're pretty glad that we have a lot of really great things that science gave us. And that came through trial and error, thinking they were right, going back to it. Science at its core, when done properly, is just a method of inquiry. It's just a way of asking questions and going about those things. And I think that there is a kind of scientific fundamentalism of which, I don't mean to pick on Dawkins, but he's kind of an easy target, where there is that sort of absoluteness to it. But I think that we would be doing a disservice to the scientists who devote their lives to answering the same kind of questions we're trying to answer, but utilizing empirical methods. We can learn a lot through empirical methods, and we can make hybrid versions of those things for that which is paranormal, that which is difficult to understand now. 100 years ago, radio waves would have been considered witchery. I mean, we have to think about it from that perspective. They're going to be wrong all the time, but I don't know about you, but I'm wrong quite often, and I'm constantly improving upon my perspectives with kind of equal measures of humility and a sense or a desire to make sure that what I'm doing is correct. So I agree with you.
And see, I'm always
that there's an
right.
arrogance to that. Yeah.
I'm always right, and I pronounce, this is for my listeners, and I always pronounce every guest's name correctly. Always.
Well, that's a great
which is a big fat lie, but
since we know you're always right, we've killed two birds with one stone.
That's
because we can have the perfect religion. It's the religion of Rita. And we can also bounce everything that the scientists say.
Wait, let me pass that donation plate around. Let's get it right.
Right. We're solving problems here. This is wonderful.
That's right. That's right. I can't wait to the feedback on that comment. Okay. Well, it would be easier if we could all come to one mind and one level of agreement. And something that I have said for, and I hate to say it, almost 20 years, but that, the Native Americans, many indigenous cultures talk about a reality that it seems like in the West we have totally forgotten or was totally brainwashed out of us. And it is science that is kind of bringing us full circle into recognizing that, it's more than a physical manifestation on the planet, and that there's all these deeper levels of existence going on that, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, you could go to a metaphysical bookstore and get books on the topic.
Right. And I agree with you. And I think that's really beautiful. Personally, my personal belief is that there are manifold levels of reality. I believe that, for instance, many of the occultists of, the early bit of the last century, like the Golden Dawn people, they had a lot of really good ideas and kind of a hybridization and modernization of kind of magical methods of inquiry, which are highly complementary to shamanic standards, which, and Native American standards, more animistic concerns, in which you can see that they do have things. And again, it comes to the complexity of the human mind. Normally when we do things, or everything we do really, is a multi-dimensional activity. The way when I say something to someone, it's not just words coming out of my mouth. It's not just air passing through. It actually can change the chemical processes in someone else's mind because it generates emotions in them. I'm changing things with my words. That's just one level. On the audible level, my tone might be frightening other people. And perhaps in some other realm, what I say may hold a different kind of power. When we curse people, when we actually say curse words, and things like that towards other people in a malicious sense, we don't know the weight that holds. And so it's hard to tell how far it goes. And again, if we approach this with a spirit of openness, then we could be at ease just as nicely at a Native American ceremony as we would be at a scientific conference, in which both are about the exploration of self and the world around us. And we can see, in a way, the beauty of the complexity of the human mind just there, in that we have so many different ways of approaching this great quest that we have to understand more.
Why do you think that there is such, there's the dogma, but then there's the people that don't believe in the dogma. I cannot think of what the term would be, sorry. And then there are the haters of the people that don't believe in the dogma. But why do you think there's just this kind of vicious cycle of, new beliefs that come out, and then everybody criticizing these new ideas instead of looking at them and postulating, could they be true, versus just trying to eradicate them?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the UFO phenomena is a great
that's a good example.
Whipping boy for this, right? The reasons are manifold. You have people who have absolute beliefs. Maybe it's an absolute belief in Jesus, and they say the UFO phenomena is absolutely demons trying to confuse you and make you want to believe that demons are actually or aliens are actually demons, or vice versa, and that's that. And then you have scientists who are like, well, I haven't seen any UFOs, so therefore there aren't any. Well, I haven't seen the implants in people's ears and things like that. So there's multiple reasons, and they're not all based on fear. Many people have a genuine sense of trying to get to the bottom of things, but a lot of people have been suckered in the past too. And not everything that we think, we don't even understand. Even if aliens showed up right now and manifested themselves in front of everyone, we wouldn't even know who they were quite. You know what I mean? If they came to us, I think that this is one of the reasons why there's not some massive exposure from an alien race, because the ambiguity, and there's so little of a point of reference for the average person that it's incomprehensible. People just can't wrap their head around it. I think that there would be mass suicides. I think there'd be all kinds of crazy stuff going on if something like that were to occur. And it's a great example because there's always a backlash. It's human nature. We all think we're right. And this is why humility is so important. But then again, who wants to go through all the pain and suffering that builds true character and true humility? We live in a strange world in which we both have the potential for a lot of ease, an easy life, but we also have a form of slavery unlike anything the world has ever seen. And between those two ends of the spectrum, there's a lot of places where we could get stymied and don't even have the time to give proper attention to things. And then you have people who just make it look bad. You have people who obviously are charlatans. And then you have people who are friends with the charlatans who are genuine. You're like, what do I do? And this is where it's so important for us to have a foundational method to go about things. There's just one example of what you can do to kind of help glean, at least with arguments and things like that, is the trivium method, which is it's an ancient Greek method. And you basically look for basic fallacies in language, right? And there's a great website that I've visited before called yourlogicalfallacyis.com. And it just shows a picture of common fallacies. One, for instance, would be a straw man. If say, we'll pick on me. I said that I've done psychedelics and have enjoyed the experiences and thought that they were great spiritual experiences. Well, somebody could say, see, Gabe's a drug-toting hippie and he likes communism, right? That's called a straw man. You know, it's an artificial version of who I am. It's not who I am. So they attack something that isn't me. It's kind of like a cartoon figure of myself. And that's just one linguistic way in which we really make divides between each other. And you'll find that in politics, especially, it's just logical fallacy after the next. The arguments aren't getting anywhere because the arguments aren't real. They're just dancing with each other's strawmen. So when we're talking about things like UFOs or people who go about doing things like that, we don't have a method of kind of clearing the air and figuring things out. We're not given the proper tools, or we don't seek the proper tools to make good decisions about what is true or truer. And so it's quite difficult to do that, and all of that requires effort. Again, it comes down to trained laziness in some ways.
I'm not sure what you mean by trained laziness.
Trained laziness, you know, if you start a relationship with someone, for the sake of argument, and you come in and they say, you know what, I don't want you to lift a finger. I'm going to take care of you. And that's date number one. You go over to their house, they cook you dinner, they clean, they pour you some champagne, they go to the hot tub, and you're like, oh, can I help do clean up with dishes? And they're like, no, it's no big deal. Well, if you're a hardworking individual and you have a high ethic for egalitarianism and you really want to help, but they simply insist, if they did that for 3 or 4 weeks and every day, at some point you just stop trying to help and stop trying to butt in, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when favors are done for you in that sense, you can tend to take advantage of it. That's a kind of trained laziness, or perhaps trained laziness is too harsh of a term, kind of a trained apathy, perhaps, in which it's just it's no longer something that's even considered. So I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that in many ways we have things that put us at ease in all the right ways for people in power, and it's just easier for us to go along with it than it is to raise hell.
But it seems like in today's day and age, that is what needs to happen, because, you know, there's the sheeple word, and there is just more and more crap that just goes by, and we just accept. And, you know, and I'm going to use, you know, one of my things is GMOs. It's like, what do we need them for? A lot of other countries in the world are banning them. And, you know, if we're the most advanced country in the world, then why are we still producing them and promoting them and feeding them to the people of this country? Why are we accepting it? Right.
Well, I mean, that's money. It makes money. If it stopped making money, it would stop happening. And I think that the mechanisms that have been put in place because they work really well. And advertisers have dialed it in perfectly. They know what works for most people. So they don't really care about the fringe. It's easy to demonize the fringe, and it's easy to make them look silly when you can have a ubiquitous, homogenized version of things. When you go to Costco, you don't see every chair that was ever made. You see 5 different choices. Well, those are the 5 choices that Costco has. And I'm not picking on Costco. I'm just saying anywhere you go, it's kind of that way. You're given the illusion of choice, but you're not given all the choices. You're just given a few choices. And for most people, that's plenty good enough. And so, you know, it goes into politics and things like that as well. Noam Chomsky has said in the past that the choice between Democrats and Republicans, for instance, can be seen as kind of a minor spectrum of thoughts and ideas that are made to look like they're very drastic and extremely different, but they're not really that different. And so it kind of keeps things in place. And it's not like it's one thing. It's us. We're the ones who kind of make these monsters that we complain about. Because we could complain about this till the cows come home, but we're still going to buy Nikes and Calvin Klein, and we're still going to go to the grocery stores that we go to and buy GMO products. The reason
I feel
why,
like they just slide those in, and
possibly
because they don't have to tell us about that.
But for instance, 20 years ago, you had to go to some seriously hippie grocery stores to find organic food, right? Mm-hmm. Now, because the demand, there is a difference. And I think when people decide to vote with their wallets and be more conscious of that, there is a change that can be initiated there. And I think that that's the only way that we can get a machine that's driven by money, is to change where the money goes. Money is the fuel. If we take away our money from them, because they have no problem taking away our money, I think that's the only way that we can really initiate change.
So I have to tell you, so they have all these farmers markets. I live in Texas, and they have all of these farmers markets where I live now. So, which is really cool, because you know that you're getting obviously farm fresh produce. And so when we first started going down to the closest one to us, we were going to get some tomatoes, and they were like, they're organic and pesticide free. And it's like, well, you grew them in your backyard. I'm hoping they would be. And I'm like, oh man, these farmer people learn words like organic and pesticide free,
Right.
Anyway, sorry, I digress and go off topic. Anyway, no, but one of the things that I remember people talking with their wallet, I'm assuming with their wallet, is a number of years ago, and I don't know if you'll remember these, but they came out with those Wow potato chips. Do you remember those?
Are those the ones that had Olestra in them?
Yes, sir.
Oh, look at that.
And when they first came out, people were like, oh man, you could eat all these chips and not get all the fat. And there was a warning label. I mean, I used to do nutrition lectures, and I had a bag of Wow potato chips that went in my box that I took to presentations, because it was the only food substance that I've ever seen that had a Surgeon General's warning label on them. And I thought to myself, are we that desperate to eat a chip that we're going to poison ourselves with this junk? And they went off the market. I mean, I thought people were actually buying them, but apparently not. I don't know.
Right. So that was trained. Why chips aren't the only delicious thing in the world, but we got to have our chips. Mm-hmm. That didn't just happen. We didn't just walk out of the woods one day and go, I am an addict to potato chips and I'm getting fat from it.
But you just can't eat just one,
Yeah.
So what can we do? What can we do to take a step back, to break out of this box, to start seeing the world from a different perspective than we've been trained to see it in?
Well, for one thing, stop being so damn afraid and so reactionary. Take responsibility for yourself. Stop blaming the president or some congressman or another people group or the liberals or the Republicans or whoever it is. Start taking responsibility for yourself. It's one of those things where people think that you have to either pull yourself up by your bootstraps or you totally have to have compassion for other people's situation. And there's no reason why those can't be complementary. We can do both of those things. And it's by being responsible, but being compassionate at the same time. These are complementary ideals. And as far as spirituality is concerned, I think that people ought to be unafraid to ask questions, because the truth is capable of fielding your questions. If something's really true, then it's impervious to your questions. It will easily withstand them. And so anytime someone's like, well, you can't say that, or you can't ask this question, or you can't do that, that's when you should really be afraid and really be concerned that you're being manipulated, and not necessarily on purpose. It might just be a kind of perpetuated self-policing or group policing thing that's going on. But it has very little to do with true spirituality, which I think is the realization that there is a divine aspect to us, but it's a part of us that we have to dig for. It's not something that's we just walk into a store and can buy. But there are enough distractions that we can just lull ourselves to sleep. There's a tiny little man inside of us that constantly needs to be fed, and if we starve that little man in our minds away, we can start to realize how much we've been distracted by things. And all of us have those distractions that are keeping us from the truth of both who we are and who we are collectively. And when we start to think of it that way, then the BS that's in every religion falls away, and the real stuff sticks around. And then the fear goes away. Well, there's nothing worse for people who are in control, who are trying to keep you where you are, than a person who's lost their fear. And I think that, or at least has learned to manage their fear. And when we come to that point, the fruit of that would be growing compassion, a growing sense of personal duty. People start doing things of their own volition instead of waiting for someone else, right? If they realize that there is nobody else coming to save them, right? That they start to say, oh, well, maybe I am okay on my own. Maybe I'm not imperfect. Maybe I wasn't born less than zero. Maybe I was born just fine and somebody told me I wasn't fine. Well, what do I do with that now? Well, I can improve my situation. I can change my situation. And along the way, we can help others as they come to that journey of discovery. And I think that we're here for a reason. And it doesn't have to be because some monotheistic God told us that they were going to set us on fire if we didn't do what they wanted to do. I think the reason might be just as simple as learning to love each other and learn from each other despite our differences and go through it. And yeah, we're going to eat some GMOs, but we're still going to live longer than the billions and billions of people who lived in generations before us. What's there to complain about? I'm 37 years old. That's, Jesus died at 33. Let's see, most people died by the age of 33. Maybe just a century ago, that was like, man, he's 45 years old. He's an old man. You know what I mean? Like, we have so much to be thankful for. And I think that we should get rid of these toxic things, but we got to take it one thing at a time. And that one thing at a time is our own one thing at a time, is changing our bad behaviors, changing our the way that we see ourselves and each other.
But it seems like, and I'm looking at the clock, we just have a couple of minutes. It seems like people these days, they want to be saved. And as I wrote it down, I go, oh, yeah, because they were given that promise at some point in time. They want to be saved. And then there's the other part with the 11th hour Hail Mary pass. I can do whatever I want. And then in that 11th hour, I can say an Our Father and a Hail Mary, and whoosh, 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 whoosh. You're good to go. Heaven. Boom. And you don't even have to do anything your whole entire life because you'll be saved at the end.
Right. And I can't think of a more lazy and abusive way to treat spirituality or access to the truly divine than to take that attitude. I would rather live the way that I'm living and go to hell than to live that way and have that sense of just the audacity of having this myopic view of the world in which everything revolves around me, and I can just lie to some spirit who's watching me as, do whatever I do with my own sex organs. You know what I mean? It's just like, that can't, when you sit down and think about it, it just can't possibly be that way. I mean, it's so basic. Like, you wouldn't treat someone like that in a person-to-person relationship. I wouldn't be like, hey, Rita, I'm going to treat you like garbage for the next 40 years. And then in the last breath of my life, I'm going to be like, oh, Rita, I'm sorry I treated you like garbage for 40 years. Sorry about that. You're not going to be like, oh, well, maybe you might be like, oh, yeah, that's cool, Gabe. Maybe you have infinite compassion. I'm sure you do. But in most
that's because I'm godlike, and
right.
they need to fill the donation plate.
But no one would accept that in a human relationship, and because that would be considered an egregious abuse of that relationship. And I think that doesn't hold water in any spiritual tradition, truly.
I'm not even going to respond to that. And I don't have time to respond to that either. Gabriel, the time is up. This hour went way fast. And so if somebody wants your book, and give out your contact information, but very quickly because we're out of time.
Just visit GabrielDRoberts.com, or if you can't remember that, just Google Gabriel D. Roberts. Thank you so much, Rita.
Well, thanks for coming on the show and sharing your expounded wisdom with the listeners. It was fun.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right. You have a great night.
All right. You too.
All right. Bye-bye. That's Gabriel D. Roberts. His book is Quest for Gnosis. His webpage is GabrielDRoberts.com. And next week, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Daniel Edmonds about a drug-free approach to ADHD and autism. And in the second hour with Dr. Eric Pearl. Man, we got like a step out.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio.